I've got my sister. I can feel her now. She may not be here, but she's still mine, I know. She still loves me. Got my house, it still keep the cold out. Got my chair when my body can't hold out. Got my hands doing good like they supposed to. Showing my heart to the folks that I'm close to. Got my eyes, though they don't see it's far now. They see more of how things really are now. I'm gonna take a deep breath. Gonna hold my head up. Gonna put my shoulders back and look you straight in the eye. Gonna flirt with somebody when they won't want. I'm gonna sing out. And hold on, I'm leaving. But most of all, I'm thankful for loving who I really am. I'm beautiful. Yes, I'm beautiful. And I'm
Hello, everyone. I'd like to thank you for coming to Breaking Down the Harmful Myth of the Strong Black Woman and Addictions. I'm Shanta Langford, and I'm the training coordinator here at Freedom Institute. We'd like to let you know that this is an open forum for a much needed conversation, and we would love for you guys to use the chat feature to ask questions or to make comments. I'm now going to introduce our distinguished panelist and our moderator. To find their full bios, you can actually click on the QR code. First up, we have Dr. Jeannette Aycock. Dr. Aycock, she has had a residency in psychiatry at St. Vincent Hospital and Medical Center in Manhattan. She was a chief resident during her final year in 1983. She did postdoctoral training at St. Vincent's Hospital, completing a fellowship in administrative psychiatry. She is now in full-time private practice for over 30 years. Hi, Jeannette.
Hello, and thank you for that introduction. I'm so happy and honored to be here to discuss what is part and fabric of my own life, dealing with the myth of the strong Black woman and what can happen if over and over again you keep forcing yourself to keep being better and keep thinking that you're not enough. At the time that I became a psychiatrist, And at the time that I became a medical student, things were certainly different from where they are now. And yet I see that there are a long way that we need to go. I myself have been someone who is slow to talk about when I am depressed or when I am down. But I'm very happy that early in my career, I decided to get off the rat race of clinical practice or hospital practice, and I stopped working in the hospital and began private practice because I was able to choose my hours and also to do self care. Self care is something I now focus on in my daily living and also with my patients.
Thank you, Jeanette. Next, we have Dr. Izetta Briggs-Bolling. Dr. Bowling holds a doctorate in social work, and she's a licensed clinical social worker. She also is, I'm sorry, a licensed mental health counselor, which specializes in problem gambling treatment, and federally qualified substance abuse counselor for the Department of Transportation. Izetta has been the executive director of Addiction Cycle Breakers since 2003.
Hello, thank you. Thank you, Shanta, for
Mhm.
introducing me. Hello, everyone, and I'm so grateful that all of you are here with us tonight. Just watching the video that we just watched that Shanta put together so eloquently. It just makes me think about, first of all, the Black women that I am standing on their shoulders to even be able to be to be in this space with you all, and the other Black women that I'm standing shoulder to shoulder with as we do this work going forward. As a young woman, born and raised in Harlem, New York, the opportunities there were opportunities available, but they weren't available to everyone. And I am appreciative of an opportunity to go through the struggles of growing up and becoming an adult in Harlem, New York, and having lived experience with addiction and other substances, and also being able to rise up and be someone that provides services in a way that others can understand and that they recognize that I am understanding where they come from. When I think about the myths of being a strong Black woman in this country and the communities that I'm used to frequenting and helping other women that are experiencing some of the traumatic experiences that I also have experienced, and the importance of self-care and standing up and rising up and holding your head up. So I appreciate being a part of this forum today. Thank you.
Thank you, Izetta. Next, we have Dr. Kamala Green Genesee. Dr. Genesee is a New York State licensed clinical psychologist with over 20 years of experience in the design and implementation of addiction treatment programs and the utilization of cognitive behavioral techniques for the treatment of co occurring substance abuse and mental health disorders. Dr. Genesee currently serves as the Chief Clinical Officer at the Behavioral Health Group, an organization that runs 116 outpatient addiction treatment centers in 22 states. Dr. Green?
Thank you. And again, thank you for inviting me, Shanta. And I'm honored to be on this esteemed panel with Dr. Aycock and Dr. Bowling. And thank you for sharing a little bit of my history. And I think it's related to as what we're all here to discuss, which is the myth of the strong Black woman. And I say myth in quotation marks because I think, again, the video inspired, I think, all of us a feeling of connection to where we have been as Black women, where we have where we've come from, and where we are going. Finishing with obviously our esteemed next president, Kamala Harris. But I think that one of the reasons why many of us have been so invested in upholding that myth is because many of us have been socialized to be soldiers in the movement against negative stereotypes against Black people and Black women in particular. So even though maybe when on the inside we're not feeling that strong, and our main desire is to be taken care of, or to practice self-care, or to rest. Many of you have heard, I think, Roseanne Gay saying that it's radical for Black women to rest. But because we have been socialized as soldiers in the movement of fighting negative stereotypes, we resist that. And we attempt to continue to keep going to ensure that those that came before us and that those that are going to come after us will continue to be able to continue that path. It is often so much more than about us. And I think that's one of the things that we hopefully will begin to talk about tonight, which is that you can still be part of that journey and take care of yourself at the same time. So I look very much forward to this discussion. And again, I'm very honored to be here.
Thank you. And finally, we have Dr. Andrew Tatarski. Dr. Tatarski has worked with people who struggle with drugs and their families for over 40 years. He's a leader in the field, and Dr. Tatarski has developed integrative harm reduction psychotherapy to address the spectrum of risky and addictive behavior. As the Director of Clinical Programming here at Freedom Institute, Dr. Tatarski is integrating the IHRP framework into the organization's abstinence based programs to develop a comprehensive, individualized, harm reduction informed addiction treatment program. He is also responsible for developing and facilitating internal and external IHRP training programs for individual practitioners and organizations. Dr. Tatarski?
Thank you so much, Shanta. We credit you with spearheading this very, very important gathering, and I'm very appreciative to you for that leadership. I am also incredibly honored to have the privilege of hosting all four of you really special people, and have a lot of gratitude for your generosity in joining us, sharing your wisdom, your experience with us and with the audience. Freedom Institute is a place that has been around for almost 50 years, and we have always been, kind of committed to providing the highest quality, individualized, comprehensive care for the spectrum of people that struggle with substance use issues, and really contributing to the ongoing development of that. And I think one of the newer developments has been that we've been developing a kind of expanded harm reduction informed continuum of care treatment here at Freedom Institute. And part of our commitment is not just offering, this treatment, but supporting others who are doing this kind of work, harm reduction informed care. And so, this Meet and Learn series is really a series that's devoted to exploring different applications of harm reduction principles and treatment to different groups of people, different social issues, and different modalities. And so it's really timely that we have a gathering right now devoted to breaking this myth of the strong Black woman. It seems particularly timely given some developments on the political scene right now. So I'm going to open the discussion, but before I do that, I'd like to just read sort of the blurb that we put together to kind of frame the conversation. I think, so in the kaleidoscope tapestry of American culture, the myth of the strong Black woman emerges both as a beacon and a burden, intricately woven by Hollywood's lens. Films and television have long perpetuated an image of resilience, synonymous with stoic endurance. Characters embodying this archetype often endure addiction battles, domestic violence, turmoil, and mental health struggles without faltering, as if anyone could really do that. This portrayal is usually encapsulated with resilient characters who triumph over adversity with unyielding grace and inadvertently reinforces the Black woman's schema, suggesting that strength is an inherent trait rather than a response to systemic burdens. As America now witnesses its first Black woman in the presidential race, a transformative wave ripples through generations of Black girls who once felt confined to narrow narratives dictated by outdated schemas. In this conversation, we really want to dig beneath that polished facade and start a much needed conversation around harm reduction strategies tailored specifically to those grappling with social pressures and personal demons, offering suggested pathways toward healing rather than mere survival. So I think one of the overarching questions really is, how does this myth create suffering um, for Black women, but even more generally throughout society? And how does that suffering maybe render people vulnerable to turning to substances and other self defeating behaviors in problematic ways? And how might a harm reduction framework really support um, innovative, new, more effective ways of helping folks that are struggling? And so maybe I can just kind of throw that question out to the group. Love to hear your thoughts about any and all of that.
Well, I think looking at people in general and then drilling down to, what we have learned to over expect from ourselves as a society um, is at issue. One of the things that I think is so great about this discussion is that we're a group of clinicians that have come together that are looking at these issues and ultimately being culturally sensitive and being open to a new way of looking at what can cause addiction and how we can find ways to take the stigma and harm out of everyday life is our goal. And that's, we have to have clinicians that people feel comfortable coming to. And by learning to, look at, to identify what makes pressure on a group of people is essential. And I think each of us, when we were speaking, talked about how we ourselves were impacted, what things in our lives caused us to be aware of what the pressure is on Black women specifically, and how ready are we to get out of that mold? How ready are we to stand aside and say, I don't have to be that strong person? But in order to do that, you need support to do that: professional support, social support, family support. So I think we're talking about a change in the systems in this country, in the healthcare system, and in a different way of not stereotyping all people. And unfortunately, I know in medicine, when you're learning medicine, you're taught to look for certain signs or symptoms, and then you connect the dots and say, well, this must be the diagnosis, or worse, this must be the social setting that the person comes out of. And that's not always true. So being aware and listening, I think, very important as we try to change how we look at that myth of the Black woman.
You know, one of the things that jumps out at me in what you're talking about, and you talk about a different way of understanding what we call addiction, is I think, and I'm curious about what everyone thinks about this. Traditionally, addiction has been thought of as this disease that exists in some kind of vacuum isolation within the diseased individual. And what I hear you suggesting is that this myth in our culture has an impact on people who internalize it. And that in turn causes suffering that renders people vulnerable to, addictive behavior or, addictive issues. And that we really need to think about that social context and how we help people kind of rewrite or as you put it, kind of escape from the confines of that internalized narrative, and also the need to change it out there in society to help liberate folks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for that, Dr. Tatartasy. I want to just also follow up what Dr. Aycock was saying, was that, again, I think the idea or the existence of this myth of the strong Black woman renders both individuals themselves, including myself, when you buy into that, it forces you, or can force you, to not demand care from others.
Mm.
You were put in the position of often having to be the one to care for others. And
Mm.
so the idea of being vulnerable, for asking for help, asking for care goes against that myth, which then I think ties into this idea of putting you, making you vulnerable to addictive behaviors because the substances become the way that you care for yourself.
Mhm,
And as we know, part of an addictive process is often the secretive nature of it. And
mhm,
so when you begin to use substances in a secretive way, the only way you can care for yourself, if you keep the myth alive, is to have this very secret relationship to the only way to care for yourself. That makes you become vulnerable to addictive behaviors, which then in and of itself, it's a very cyclical, sort of paradoxical relationship because then when you become dependent on the substance, you then feel shame
mhm,
around the idea that you're not living up to the myth. And
mhm,
so it is really a double-edged sword in terms of how this myth impacts. It can lead into addiction, but then perpetuate it because it leads to feelings of shame of not being able to lead up to it. So in terms of thinking
Mm.
about being a clinician and addressing this for individuals where they are in this trap, not addressing that cultural schema that many individuals carry around with them will not, I believe, lead to sort of effective treatment. So thank you for introducing that concept.
Mm.
I'd
Mhm.
like
Yeah.
to add in the Black church, there's always, the reason secrecy is so prevalent in our culture is because, we're taught and told to keep things in house, right? And when you're I grew up in Southern Baptist, and the thought that needed to go outside of God and Jesus to get healed, um, there was an issue with my mom, like she couldn't understand it, until I
Mm.
started taking my antidepressants, and then she was like, "Did you take your pills today?" Because she saw how different I was. But it took me a very
Mhm.
long time to accept that you need help outside medical, going to a psychiatrist, because those things have been shunned for so long in our culture because it it senses that you're weak, right? If you're going for help, that's essentially what we're thinking, and that's how we've been taught. And that's not the case. It actually takes strength to say, I need help, you know?
It makes me
So,
wonder about how the cultural narrative, which you're talking about, can create shame around vulnerability, around needing help, and so on. How does that get um, perpetuated through microaggressions, or both in very subtle ways um, that may even be hard to put into words, or
so
unconscious?
when I think about the myth of the strong Black woman, I think about transgenerational trauma and how that is transferred from generation to generation. But embedded in that is transgenerational, the myth of the strong Black woman. So it goes from generation to generation. So it you cannot show that anything is making you weak. One of the people that was shown in the video is Coretta Scott King. It was a big thing in my family, the way she went through the death of her husband, that she didn't cry, that she stood so strong. So that was how, when you deal with grief and loss, that's how you're supposed to present.
Mhm.
But when at the end of everything you're alone, who's there with you? There may be a bottle of this, there may be some antidepressants, there may be some other substance, and that's what people, um, if you're in secrecy, then it's okay for you to cope in that way. But a lot of times when a problem develops, sometimes people will support you, but many times your community that you rely on will ostracize you, and you're left to try to
Mhm.
figure out again on your own and then seeking help. So now there's another layer. So now you're this family member that either has a mental illness or you have a substance use problem. You're a church member that, so if you're a person coming into the church, to piggyback off what Shanta said, if you're coming into the church with this problem, then you're welcomed because God wants you in here, and there's resources to assist you. But if you're in the pews already and you develop this problem, then it's either a moral issue or you don't depend on God enough. And if you are seeking outside help, then it's one or the other. And I think the language change that we need to make is you can do both. And you need all. You need your family. Your family needs to support you. You need to see this. You need to see Dr. Aycock. You need to talk to Dr. Genesee, and you need to go wherever. You need to go to the Freedom Institute, wherever you need to go, and also be sitting in the pew and getting some spiritual guidance and physical health, addressing physical health concerns, mental health concerns, and substance use. Because as Dr. Genesee said, it is a cycle, but it's a cycle that incorporates all three areas of your life, and including spiritual. And I think that's we need to change. We are the only people that can change the narrative, and I think we have to.
So can we just share Stacy Jackson's comment? As an addiction therapist, I discourage women from using the word strong. When I discussed my capstone with a colleague, she sent me this presentation. I'm so appreciative she did. So what about this word strong? Why is that problematic? And I think you've all been speaking to that.
I mean, I think when it comes to, I mean, again, strong can certainly have positive connotations, but I think in this context, and thank you, Stacy, for writing that, I think it's again, it implies, so supernatural sort of power that does not need any assistance, sort of an innate sort of ability to stand on your own, almost as like a strong tree, trunk or something of that nature that just is able to just go on and go on and go on. And I think, again, by continuing to buy into that, rather than maybe using the word resilient or adaptive or, ability to cope. I mean, we could, come up with some, sort of synonyms for that may convey the same meaning, but do not sort of implicitly take along with it this idea of as strong as an oak that needs nothing but sunshine and air.
Yes. And I think Stacy, again, I thank her for that comment, because that a therapist is thinking about these issues is one of the support systems that everybody needs, is an informed and empathic listening ear who has some understanding of what strong Black woman means, or what the culture is that brought that out. And I think another thing is, it also reminded me of a male friend of mine who was having a difficult time, and we were talking, and he said, I guess I just have to stand up and be a strong Black woman about this. And the idea that this myth has been embraced by other people, and where it does have strong being a good connotation, an enviable and an admired connotation, but it almost also traps you in the place as a woman of, well, now this is what they expect, and if I crack, I am letting everybody down. So it can be difficult to let go of what is a positive image that you use to keep yourself going. So there's that vicious cycle that can make you hold on to the secret of, how do I keep this going?
It's like the narrative makes people feel that to be vulnerable, to not be able to do it alone, on one's own, to need care, is sick, or is damaged, or is, it seems totally dehumanizing to me, that myth. So Worthy Williams says, in my experience, having to be strong was a direct trickle down from watching my mother care for me. Wow, there's what you were talking about, Izetta. And my first cousin was a single parent due to my aunt's addiction. My mother wasn't allowed to take breaks or grieve situations properly. God forbid she took a moment away from the role and responsibilities she was expected to carry out, including assisting my aunt through her mental health and substance use. So many things in our family dynamic would have felt so far apart, fell so far apart. My aunt's struggle. Wow, that's powerful.
And when I think of that, and as I was thinking as we are all speaking, I think about the education, that education in reference to mental health and in reference to substance use. I don't think that was we were I don't even think we felt that we should become educated in those areas because they were taboo. That is not, you're not supposed to become dependent on a substance. You're not supposed to have a mental health condition. Depression, it was pick yourself up, get up, do something to make yourself feel better, keep going. And now the importance of educating our family members and expressing to our family members the importance of going to get care for whatever situation it is. We'll go to the doctor. It took a while for us to even go for physical health concerns. Diabetes was something that, you did whatever you could, but you really didn't go to the doctor for it. You didn't want to take the medication. We wouldn't change our diets. And when it comes to mental health and addiction, now we need to make sure that our people are just as informed, and we need to be willing to say, let's go see someone. This doesn't seem normal. It may be normal, but you may be experiencing or challenged to manage something that you might be able to get some help for. Let's go see about it. And I think that's the first step that we need to do for one another and encourage each other to do. So if you're here today and you have a loved one that you're concerned may be having a challenge, then talk to them about it. Don't act like, don't ignore it. Don't put the burden of onus on them. Share it with them and be willing to take them to seek the help that they may need at this time.
I think now you're really raising, I'm hearing, what can Black women or what can people in the culture more broadly do to help change this narrative, maybe at a macro level, but also for individuals. I'm hearing right now the four of you sort of taking leadership and modeling and kind of stepping out to use your own experience to model changing this image or this narrative, I guess, the myth, breaking the myth.
And I think sharing our narrative, and realizing that showing that you're vulnerable is not a weakness. What is strength? Strength is being able to reach out, and also for people who are healthcare providers to say, I can't do this alone, because I think the doctors here will attest that when you're in training, the last thing you may be told is, well, if you really need some help or if it's too much, you can come to me as your preceptor or as your mentor, and I'll help you through that. It's discouraged at some levels. You'll figure it out on your own, and that generational, I had to figure it out, so you have to figure it out too. So we have to teach people, I think, by as much as we're able to become vulnerable, to let ourselves be vulnerable and say, yeah, I had a problem with that and I got some help. Or if not with your client or your patient, to have cherished and trusted people around you that you can say, I'm having a hard time. Can you just listen to me for 5 minutes? I think that that's important in helping us as caregivers model behavior that can help those we're trying to care for.
No, absolutely. And I see that Troy mentioned something about strength, and thank you, Dr. Aycock, for commenting on that. I did want to just go back a little bit, and maybe we'll come back to this later, to talk a little bit about the concept of transgenerational trauma, again, and how that's sort of playing out a little bit. And so again, if we think about, what trauma responses really are, they're sort of, exaggerated on some level, but in sort of in relation to something very difficult, very painful, very frightening, very scary that is happening. So you develop a series of behaviors in the attempt to cope with that very scary thing. And so if we think about the history of former enslaved people in this country, what they have been through, much of what we're talking about today, this myth of the strong Black women, the myth of not letting secrets out, the myth of always being strong, can be conceptualized in many ways as a trauma response to the fear of being harmed by a society that has never taken care of us. And that goes back to what you were saying, Dr. Tatartasy, about this idea of microaggressions, which is that for many of us, and all of us, I think, have experienced this, and this is, I think, why a lot of these behaviors exist, is that Black people or brown people of color have often been perceived as a collective. When one Black person does something, that represents what all Black people do. If a non-person of color does something, they're an individual. And so there is this collective response that people of color have, which is that I better act right because I am representing everyone around me. Now, again, what that is harmful, that is difficult, it's toxic. We're talking about all the ways that it is, but it is a cultural phenomenon within our communities. And so I think it's important to just see how that is, as many of our participants have written in and our panelists have said, that is a transgenerational transmission of traumatic behaviors. We are socialized to try to protect each other from negative perceptions. And weakness within our community could often result in death. These are sort of collective, internalized experiences that many people of color in this country have, coming from former enslaved individuals, and also immigrants coming from former enslaved communities. And so I think that as we start to move away from these things, I think giving air to them, as we talk about if we're treating trauma, one of the first initial steps is psychoeducation. This is why you're behaving like this. This is a response to X, Y, and Z. And so I think that's what we want to try to bring into this discussion, is that it's understandable that you are trying to stand there in your strength. But let's unpack that a little bit and recognize that that is a sort of maladaptive way of coping that you've been taught, we've all been taught as members of this community.
Well, and also what you're saying is it is maladaptive, but it was survival.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
And I think that that's equally important to name.
Absolutely. Thank you.
It makes me think of, Gabor Mate defines trauma as not what happens to you, but what you have to do in response to survive.
Yes.
And he kind of speaks to the need to disconnect from our own sort of authenticity, our own self. And this is what you're really talking about, I think.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for bringing up Dr. Mate, who is one of my individuals in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we also have to. I'm looking at a message a message from Sean Williams. Growing up, she never learned how to express feelings because of the images she saw of Black women around her. She had to teach herself late in life to honor and express all feelings, and it is very freeing. It is very freeing, but it's also very scary to get to a place where you feel that, okay, I need to learn how to express my feelings. I need to allow myself to feel to feel that I have feelings. And how does that translate throughout my family, throughout my career, throughout the fears that I have? So if I allow, and I'll use an example, if I allow myself to acknowledge that, there is a problem with young Black males having interacting with police. So if I allow myself to feel that fear for my child, for my son, my Black son in America, how do I respond as a parent? Am I able to continue to maintain the appropriate level of strength while providing the appropriate education and still moving forward in my parental role and encouraging my son to continue to be the best that he can be with these concerns and these fears. So it all ties in to everything. Like everything we do, I think it kind of it becomes exponential, and it grows out from us, because the woman is one of the backbones of the family, with what in whatever role you are in. There are single parent homes, there are two parent homes, but the woman, there is a responsibility and a role that we play, that we keep it all together. And we do have fears in many different areas that can create, that can cause a mental health concern for a loved one, for a family member, and things that we have to manage and try to keep together.
Mm.
Mhm. And I
Dr.
think going back to what Dr. Janisi said, and as well as what Dr. Bolling was saying, is that um, it's not always a myth. You know, you've had to be strong. You
Mhm.
still have to be strong. And the issue is how to be strong. That we don't have to be strong by just muscling our way through it. And
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
hopefully, with time and help, you can then find a way to be strong in a different way. It's not that I have to hold everything together, but I'm going to find a more modified way to be strong. And so I just, building on what the two doctors said. Thank you for those statements. Thank you.
The question Shanta brought up earlier, the church, and I'm wondering what folks' thoughts are about actually how the church can help address mental health and substance use issues. What role the church might play. Well, maybe what role has it played, as we were kind of saying before, maybe in perpetuating some of this myth, but um, how might church really help kind of rework it to really support, optimal health and wellness?
I would like to say that I am seeing a major shift.
Mhm.
I am seeing a major shift within the church community of embracing mental health concerns, and even having forums and seminars where the church and the mental health professionals come together. And there are churches that open their doors and have AA meetings and NA meetings, and support the community. There are churches that they have specific programs within the church that address many different areas of mental health and substance use. So there's been a significant shift, and I'm hoping that it spreads exponentially, and that the first place a person might want to go is to the church to find out what other resources are in the community, because oftentimes the church may have a soup kitchen, or have
Mm.
some um some opportunity for someone that's seeking help to be able to speak to someone, and then be connected to the right, and directed in the right way, that where they could find the help that they need for whatever may be occurring.
Dr. Aycock, you are very much involved with the church, and you're a mental health professional. I imagine you have lots of thoughts about this issue.
I do have a lot of thought about it. And as Dr. Bolling was speaking, it puts a big onus on the church, I think, because if you've got lots of people that are going there, and they already by definition have a shared common interests and a shared sense of support, um, the church can be a way to direct people in a way that's meaningful for them, to mental health sources, to NA meetings, to sponsoring the kinds of resources that a person can use and will need. And also, that person is more likely, that they are referred to be culturally sensitive to them, which is so very important. Nothing is more off-putting than going into a therapist and this person is, living on a street that you never heard of before you went there, and they are sitting in front of you or separated by a desk and talking to you and then giving you a prescription for what you should go out and do. And they have no idea how difficult it was for you to get to that appointment. Did you have to have childcare before you could come to that appointment? How many people got together to help to get the money for that appointment? And then they're given a medication, for example, which it may work or it may not work, but costs a lot of money. So there are so many barriers that need to be examined in how we try to give people help. And people will know those barriers before they go to them. They'll say, what's the point of me going to a doctor, a social worker, anyone? I'll go once. What is that going to do? I can't keep it up. So we need to find other ways that are culturally appropriate.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I think that's where, if the family is connected, I think that's where where we could really become a village. And I think it's really important to ensure that family members are brought in to the treatment process so that they can be educated and have an understanding if there are mood swings or if this is going on, that, to be supportive and understanding that whatever the situation is, it didn't happen overnight, and it's not going to resolve itself overnight, and to be willing to stay in the process with their loved one, and also understand that they will experience a process as well, and then everyone heals together.
Mm-hmm. And then just Dr. Tracy, just to answer your question about the church, again, I certainly share both Dr. Aycock and Dr. Bolling's experience of churches being much more sort of receptive. I mean, most churches these days have health and wellness ministries, which incorporate psychiatry, psychology, and addiction. But just thinking about it from the addictive healing side, traditional non-harm reduction, but traditional addiction treatment had a very large spiritual component to it. And so it's really a natural marriage, really, in terms of thinking about behavioral change, cultural change, psychological change, but then also sort of spiritual, sort of exploration, and sort of how can we bring these things together, I think, in a way that really ultimately does fit really, really well. So I'm encouraged to see that continuing to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a big spiritual component to harm reduction as well. It's all
Yeah.
included.
Thank you, Dr. Moore.
Yeah, and if we dig, we look at the Bible.
Yes,
It's
yes,
really
yes.
quite
And
harm
I just want to
reduction.
also acknowledge the comment. Someone put up a lovely book. It was called Ruth King, Mindful of Race. I think I'm going to check that out. So thank you so much for sharing.
Yes.
Yeah, that comment went by very quickly. Here it is. Okay, Ruth King's book says, Edeline McWilliams, thank you. Mindful of Race can be a great resource. Read her own experience with finding a meditation, mindfulness practice, care, positive adaptive way to cope with intergenerational and racial trauma. So thank you for the shout out for that book. I'm hearing also now where people are starting to talk about harm reduction, and what is that, and how might that be helpful? Harm reduction principles, harm reduction treatment, and also maybe we can begin to morph a little bit into where does psychotherapy, group therapy, family therapy, where might all of the professions that we're all involved with, how might they play a role?
So for me, what resonates with me is this phrase that we've all been using for years: start where the person is, start where they are. So if someone comes in, and it makes me think about women and women Black women in addiction. Many women, they have children. Is a lot of what Dr. Aycock and Dr. Genesee, I'm hoping I'm saying it right, were saying of the barriers that many people that we may have when seeking treatment. So someone may say, oh, well, you're drinking this amount, you're smoking this, you're doing that. You need to go to an inpatient rehab and you need to be there for 6 months to a year. That may just not be reasonable, rational, or doable. So where is this person? So yes, they may be drinking. Yes, they may be doing things that are not helpful to them at this time. But how do we begin the conversation? How do we start where they are and use some motivational interviewing and show them that I am here. I will be here next week. If you come next week, and the work can begin where you are. And harm reduction is helping this person to, first of all, to instill hope that there can be a change, how, no matter how small, and that change should be celebrated. And where do we go from here? And over time, change can and will occur because I am here with you right where you are, and being a support system to you right in your community, and trying to help get other resources that you may need so that your children are not taken away, because we know that is that's disproportionate in the African American community. So if we get together and acknowledge what the barriers are and try to come up with some solutions, beginning where the individual is in their journey of change.
Dr. Bolling, I'm hearing what comes to mind is radical acceptance, respect, support, empowerment, a relationship, offering a relationship that's not conditional on you do it my way, but really, as you say, start where the person is and try to offer something that actually speaks to them, their needs, their motivation, and so on. It sounds very loving, actually. Others.
And thank you again, thank you, Dr. Bolling. I think for that really encapsulating summary of harm reduction. And I think it's this idea of what resonated with me in particular was this idea of sort of celebrating change, however that may be, huge, small, anywhere in between. And particularly that clinical example that you gave, that individual's ability to reduce use, create a safer environment for their children, maybe to function better, working, whatever it is. It may not include abstinence, it may not include going to rehab, but any of those small changes can make huge changes, in the individual's life. But as you both said, and as Dr. Tatartasy said, it really starts with this idea of radical acceptance of where the person is. And so I thank you for that summary. And just one other thing I would add to that is that I think what I particularly appreciate about the harm reduction perspective is I think it allows for the freedom to look at, without blame, without judgment, the way in which substances have functioned in a person's life. And maybe you're attempting to disentangle that functioning at some point, little, maybe over time, whatever that looks like for the person. But I think away from the harm reduction perspective, we may lose that analysis because we're immediately saying, nope, okay, go here. And you don't really have an understanding of what that substance or that behavior was serving in the function of that person's life. And then you miss the person, you miss the relationship, you miss an understanding of what they were struggling with and where they need to go. And so I think that's what I appreciate about what the harm reduction perspective opens us up to. It's really a freedom to do this really in-depth analysis for someone's relationship to how they've been coping with their life.
Yeah.
Dr. Aycock?
Yeah. I was really, Doctors Bolling and Janice, you've hit all the points that I just kind of built my practice on and my life on. It's that you have to let go of what your expectations are of the person as a therapist and look at the person in front of you, and the fact that they got to you, however they got to you, to celebrate the fact that this person made this step. So, and make a point of praising what they have done. You got here today. They may not see it as a big deal, but it
Mhm.
really is, because they have said in coming to you, my life is unmanageable as it is, and I need a change. And we need to celebrate that and keep telling them this is good. And like they might do in a 12-step meeting, keep coming back.
Yes.
Keep coming back. As Dr. Bolling said, I'll be here next week if you're here. If you can't make it, call.
That's
Just
right.
get here however you can.
X
You
me
know,
video.
so.
Mhm.
mm,
Mm. So I have to throw out one of the things I'm hearing, which I'm really it warms my heart to hear, is you're really speaking to one of the major misunderstandings out there about what harm reduction is, and that is that it's harm reduction or abstinence. It's harm reduction or 12-step programs. And, how do they fit together? If harm reduction is, like you said, Dr. Briggs, meeting people where they're at, the way I think about it is people are at a whole spectrum of different places in terms
Mhm,
of
mhm,
their motivation and their needs and their strengths. So, can we put every addiction treatment, abstinence-based treatment, non-abstinence-based treatment, in that continuum, and really invite everyone into care wherever they're ready to, wherever they are on their positive change journey? Does that make sense?
I think I think it absolutely does. I think the notion or the thought that because someone walks into my office and I'm an abstinence-based clinician, um, and they meet me, that means that they are never going to use again because they met me today. And to have that expectation for someone is just, it's unrealistic. So when people come in, we have to understand that if it were that simple, they wouldn't be here talking to me. So what can we provide for this individual? And harm reduction, abstinence is on the continuum of harm
mhm,
reduction. And when you, from my experience working with people from a harm reduction um, premise, many oftentimes a person will say, you know what, I've tried to do this with a harm reduction method, and now I'm at a place where I think that I need to try abstinence because it hasn't worked, and all of the skills that I've been given, for whatever reason, they haven't worked. Even if it's for a period of time, this is something that I might need to do for myself. So it's not an us or them, it's an inclusive treatment approach to bring people in and invite them to come to a safe place where their thoughts, their feelings, and their ideas are welcome, and their experience with substances are welcome. Because most people are using something in some form, they're taking something in some form or another, whether it may be medication, whether it may be self-medicating with alcohol, or the legal drugs or the illegal drugs. It doesn't matter. If someone is hurting, we need to figure out a way to help them and move them forward in their journey, whatever that is.
Can I just thank you very much. That's a beautiful contribution. I want to give a shout out to Pedro Oliveira. Pedro is actually beaming in from Lisbon. He runs
Ah,
a harm reduction housing program in Lisbon, Portugal. And he's kind of a leading harm reduction spokesperson or voice, in Portugal. So welcome, nice to see you. And he's bringing in stages of change, may
yes.
help to understand where people are.
mhm.
Folks have some comments about that. Yeah.
Well, I think it's very ironic that people finally can get themselves to treatment, and then we then say, okay, you have to be perfect before I can help you. Okay, come back when you haven't had the substance in a week, you know, and where does that come from? I think part of it comes from where funding comes from. If the person happens to have insurance, you get a certain number of days and you get a certain number of months that you can be inpatient or you can get treatment, and then the problem is expected to go away. And it's unrealistic. But it feeds into the person who has an addiction, into their perfectionism. Just as I thought, I have to do this perfectly, or I'm not going to get help, or my family isn't going to support me. And I like Pedro's idea that, you've got to look at change as something that comes in stages and not in the stages that you set as the healthcare person, but looking at how the change comes that makes sense for the person that's asking for help.
No, and again, thank you for that, Dr. Aycock. And then also, hello, Pedro. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm thinking about how all of this kind of ties together back to this myth of sort of the strong Black woman. And one thing I want to say also is that there's also, as Dr. Bolling was saying, there's the myth that there are sort of good substances and bad substances. I think that's also something that our society has to really come to grips with. That people are taking many things. I take a numerous number of substances on a daily basis, and nobody's policing me and telling me that I have to go to a 12-step program or I need to stop using them because I need them to function. So I think it's important for for people to dismantle that myth. But I think it goes back also to this notion of the strong Black woman, this idea that of living up to the perception of doing things in a perfect way. As Dr. Aycock was saying, is if you're not recovering in a particular way, you're doing it wrong and you're not strong, which is harm reduction, I think, embraces this idea of embracing all change, that there is no one perfect way to make change towards getting better. And there may be 3 steps forward and 2 steps back, but that's still change. You never lost, as Dr. Bolling was saying, you never lost the skills that you learned when you took the 3 steps forward. And so let's embrace that whole process. And so I think breaking down the myth of what harm reduction is and isn't is very much directly related to this idea of breaking down this myth of the strong Black woman. There's only one way to do things. It has to be this way, and you can't crack, and you can't let anybody, see you sweat. And so I think that's also what I think what we have to think about in parallel as it relates to the recovery process.
As I'm listening, I'm wondering. I'm having a very radical idea, but that if we create, this seems to be what many of you are suggesting. If we create this therapeutic context in which somebody is invited in with their substances or wherever they are, and then supported in kind of unpacking that and really discovering that they're using in response to pain, suffering, self-care, vulnerability, and that is met with respect and compassion and even affirmation. You're suggesting we offer somebody a new experience. In therapy, we talk about the corrective emotional experience or relational experience that actually says, not just says, but gives a person experience that I can be respected and cared about and known and safe with my vulnerability. And is that where this myth can start to get, or one of the places, start to get reworked, kind of healed?
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
I know that Edelyn also said something again. Thank you.
And maybe Edelyn says, maybe this is an odd word to lump in. It seems there's creativity or creative process embedded in harm reduction. Wow. Folks
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm just, yes, thinking about that with some patients I've dealt with, and they're saying, I can't stop. I can't, whatever the substance is. And then we sit there together and say, well, how might we be able to make a change that's going in the direction of where you want to go? And maybe for that person, the creativity may be, okay, I'm not going to drink on a Tuesday at between 5 and 6. Yes. And if they come back the next week and they haven't had a drink between 5 and 6 on Tuesday, celebrate that, because what they're going to do is say, but I drank the other time. It said, no, that wasn't the contract.
Right, right.
That's not, so I think, but enlisting the person to give them some control and a sense of empowerment, that there are some things that I can do for myself that make sense for me. And that's all it has to make sense for. And they can walk out of there feeling, okay, I'm getting this, and I'm not getting it alone. I'm not doing this all by myself.
I think what you're saying is what the field has said for about 20 years, that the patient develops the treatment plan. But that really has not been the case. But in what we are proposing is they do develop the treatment plan. If I'm saying between 5 and 6 on a Tuesday, I am not going to drink, I'm going to do my best not to drink, then that is their treatment plan for that week. And they have created it. So they have created a plan that they will probably be able or make a very great effort to achieve and accomplish, and then we can build off of that. So I think we're really trying to put the pieces together and make them actually work for the individual or the families or the communities that are in front of us, so that there's a collective healing process.
Mm-hmm.
Well, can we pick up on that collective healing, right? If the myth of the strong Black woman is a collective, I don't know, illness,
Burden.
Burden, yes.
burden, then it seems like we now you're also suggesting we need to move from the micro, the relationship between the client, the therapist, or the client and their families, their significant others, to some collective effort. And what does that look like? What thoughts have folks got about that?
Well, I think when we're asking our clients and patients to come up with a creative way to deal with their dependence issue, the greater overreaching problem that arises from that is dealing with systems, healthcare systems, and insurance systems, who may look at your notes and say, 1 hour, well, that doesn't meet the criteria for progress. So we, not only does the client have to be creative, we have to try and be creative in how we bring these issues to an insurance company, to a family. A family might say an hour, well, that's not helping very much. And you've got to find a creative way for the insurance company, the family, or whatever supportive agency to look at that hour and say, this is progress. And that's going to take some creative dancing by both the clinician as well as the client.
I guess I'm thinking as I'm listening to you, Dr. Aycock, to the extent that these narratives, these wrong ideas about this myth about what we call addiction, about what treatment should look like, have been institutionalized. It seems to me I believe we have a responsibility then to kind of take on system change. That because that's perpetuating it to the extent that this has all been institutionalized.
I love what you said, Dr. Aycock, about the insurance companies. And I know that in our culture we say it takes a village. So we have to get them on board and make them part of our village, so that when we are promoting a treatment process, that they will understand that the African American community is different. And and from that, maybe it can grow further. But right now we're talking about the African American community and what we need to do for our people as collectively is something different that might be outside the box. So we may need 1 hour. And how do we invite them to our table so that we can make some changes because what we're dealing with is systemic, and it's transgenerational. So now we need to make some changes and invite people to the table that will look at it from that systemic approach. And if it helps some people, then we've done something, and then we can broaden it to more and more. But we got to start where we have to start. And I think making the insurance companies and whomever, social services, whomever, a part of the village.
Mhm.
Mhm.
No, absolutely, Dr. Bowling. And then just also back to your question, Dr. Tatartasy, that's the idea of sort of collective and making changes. We talked about insurance companies. I think we also have to look at sort of the structural other structural institutions within which Black women have entered, and look at how those systems continue to perpetuate, unfortunately, the need for Black women to have to continue to behave in this strong manner. Many of these institutions are so toxic and so and so destructive. And going back to what your notion is about mindset, that even if you are not consciously bound to them, for you to simply survive, it requires such levels of resilience. Again, flipping the word strong, but to resilience. And so rather than looking at, I have to be so strong to exist within these systems, let's look at, can we change these systems so you don't have to be a warrior to be there every single day? So I think that, again, thinking about insurance companies, think about educational institutions, thinking about hospital systems, Dr. Aycock. I was raised in a hospital system myself as a professional. I'm very familiar with that. So this idea that we have cultural, systemic, and societal institutions that draw upon this myth and depend upon this myth to invite Black women into it, and we need to look at how we can change those institutions rather than individuals having to buy into it.
Mhm. Well put. Yes.
Yeah. And there's another more personal dimension, which is how might Black women support one another in around all of these issues that we've been talking about.
I think it's important not to downplay or underestimate the importance of getting together.
Mm-hmm.
Whether, I think that, that often is the thing that goes, well, this week, it's the end of the week. I just want to go home. I don't want to talk to anybody. But to make some time in your schedule, if it's 5 or 15 minutes, this is self care. I'm very big on
Mm-hmm.
self care, and start with 15 minutes a week, where you will just say, I'm going to call so and so because she will listen, and just tell her or him, or whoever you call, you don't have to say anything. I just need my 15 minutes where I just
Mm.
unload. And also to give yourself in each day 5 or 10 minutes, you can carve it out. That I'm just going to, if I just sit and stare at a blank wall, it's my 5 minutes or 10 minutes to do that. And so I think self care is how we debunk the myth, let go of the myth, and really embrace what is being a strong Black woman without having to carry the weight of everybody we know on our shoulders.
Mm.
Mm.
I think what we are doing right now is important. We are here, we are together, and we are creating a space, hopefully a safe space for others to join. And hopefully each one will teach one or bring one or speak to one, and it will become infectious, and it'll just keep spreading that we are taking care of each other for ourselves together.
Again, and I think, again, it's following up what Dr. Aycock and Dr. Bolin is saying, and I think it is essential. And I'll just speak again, creating a safe space, being willing to be vulnerable. I think it is essential for Black women to create, for lack of a better word, people have different names for it, sister circles where they are willing and able to be vulnerable with each other. We have agreed as a group to unmask.
Yeah.
I'm masked all day. I'm masked in this group. I'm masked in this group. This is I will have a self-selected group, and I'm sure many. I see head shaking, and I'm sure many people on this call have that. to create a self-selective group of individuals where you are capable of unmasking, where you're able to, thank you, Carol, for sister circles are key, to be able to be yourself, to let your guard down, to be vulnerable, and to say, I just need you. I just need this collective bonding, understanding, empathy, whatever it may take, dancing, it could be anything, where you're just able to connect on that vibrational level with an individual who shares a very similar experience.
Yes.
Mhm. Well, we've got about 10 minutes left. I'm wondering if we could stay on this theme of what can Black women do with each other or for themselves, to take care of themselves. Dr. Aycock's main theme of yours, self-care.
Mhm.
Tips, suggestions, creative ideas. What would you like to really tell this group of people that have tuned in to hear about your experience and wisdom?
Well, one thing that I started with the subgroup of self care probably in 1994 when it was during the AIDS crisis, and a group of my colleagues tried to establish this retreat at Sea Ranch in California, where healthcare professionals could come for a weekend. They'd get massages. They would be able to talk to a therapist. There was a gourmet chef that made meals, and we thought, oh, all we need to do is just carve out this official space of time and people will come. Well, what we found out was people had to be told and then driven to come to this because they had guilt about self-care. They felt they were being torn away from the people they were helping. How could they be doing this when people were dying? There were all of these
Mhm.
reasons they gave against self-care. And so what I learned from that is, as Dr. Bolling said, you have to take people where they are. Maybe they can't go all the way to a retreat, but encourage people to journal. As Carol Lawson, a person on the feed said, sister circles. If you can't do that, maybe you can call someone at the end of the day and talk for 5 minutes. Uh,
Mhm.
you can take a bath, a luxuriating bath. You can look in the mirror and say, you've done a great job today. Thank you for taking care of yourself and me, your inner self. Find ways, and that's where I think you can be creative with, if you're talking to clients or talking to yourself. Let me find ways that speak to me, that are revitalizing. For me, I, for instance, love to collect dolls, as some of you may see from all of these dolls around me. So I allow myself that hobby and that interest, and it refreshes me. It gives back to me. So find ways that refresh you, and don't be ashamed to use them because they are essential to your life. They really are life affirming and necessary.
I would like to say this. As African American Black women, we have learned to be strong in silos on our own, standing
Mhm.
alone. And we've also learned to not really trust each other or share what's happening with each other. And I'm encouraging us to find someone, to get with someone, get with some people, get in groups where you can authentically be yourself and create agreements within the group, within the space, that we are going to take care of each other. We're not going to tear each other down. If the
Mhm.
three of us are in a room together, we are together. We're not separated and we're not in competition. We are all strong in our own careers, in our own, with our own might, but together we could be amazing. Look at what we're doing. So it can grow. And so we need to, that's a myth that I want us to break. We don't have to be in a silo. We don't have to be alone. We can be together.
And Dr. Bowling and Dr. Aycock, just following up on that, the same sort of thing. I do just want to bring up the concept. We don't have that much time left, but also, to be willing to be vulnerable, to acknowledge our feelings of shame around particular issues. And if we tie it back to this concept of, again, the myth of the strong black woman, the internalized cultural shame that many of us unconsciously carry with us. And I think that the purpose of the sister circles, the purpose of having that person to call at the other end of the day, the person of having individuals to be with, is to be vulnerable in dropping that and acknowledging that and saying, I see you for who you are. And so all the practices that Dr. Aycock and Dr. Bolling just alluded to are the process within which we can unload some of those difficult feelings that society is very invested in continuing to invigorate in us, for a lack of a better word. And so we have to, as a collective, be willing to be vulnerable and fight against that with each other.
Mm. Well, can I also bring it into this group? What have you created in the last hour and a half as a sister circle, or as an experience of not just sharing ideas, but sharing vulnerability, sharing, being together in a certain way. It's felt deeply alive, moving to me, and I feel a lot of gratitude just for being able to, be part of this experience. I wonder where, maybe just by way of kind of sharing with one another or checking out, kind of like what the experience has been for you.
Well, for me, the powerful experience was just being on this panel. I would love to collaborate with the two of you
Yes.
moving forward. I mean,
Yes,
it's that in a
absolutely.
way that I had not met you before now. And so I think that that feels really hopeful and inspiring, that I now feel like I have these colleagues that I can't wait to follow up with. So that I feel very hopeful that way.
Yeah. Yes. I would agree. I think starting this, it was anxious and wondering how it was going to go, and am I going to say something stupid? And
My
I
gosh.
what I got was so much support that I could feel, even in a Zoom session, which is another thing. Don't discount, if you can't get together in person, at least be able to connect in whatever way you can. And I would love to keep talking with my two other sisters and my brother by extension. I would love to be able to continue this.
I am so excited. I was so nervous, not knowing what to expect, and I'm so excited that I'm here. I'm a part of, and there's a part of me that wishes we could see who's here, to just see how many
Right?
people
Yeah.
actually came, um, and the information that we've shared and that they've shared, just to see who's here, who's with us. That's what I think I want to say. Who's with us?
Well, I wonder if anyone, we have a few minutes left, if anyone who's with us wants to put their name and, where they're beaming in from, and if you folks want to make any final comments to the panel. But also, I noticed, Shanta, you joined us again. Maybe you want to chime in or share your experience of this gathering.
I think it's been wonderful because I know each of you um, on a different in social settings. Jeannette and I are both Stephen ministers at Marble Collegiate. Izetta and I worked at the Center for Optimal Living, and Kamala is the cousin of one of my closest friends. So, and Dr. Tatarski, that's my buddy. That's we're training. We like to come up with different programs. So I think it's just wonderful, like you said, continue the conversation. I have sister circles with 7 or 8 of my closest friends. Jeanette and I started a podcast because we found that nobody was single with no kids over 40. So,
Hey, Chapel.
but that was also very good for us to just unleash what society says about, women who have chosen not to be married and have kids. So I think Izetta said it earlier too, not to have shame around anything that you're dealing with, and that you have a core group of friends who can listen to you without any judgment. And I think with our Stephen ministry and our training, that's what we were taught. Just sit with the person and be there for the person, no matter, and let them talk and let them just be free to say whatever they want to say, without any judgment or without feeling like you have to say something. So that's been very helpful for me in my life with my friends and my family. Because sometimes I think as Black women, we always feel like we have to fix, because 9 times out of 10 we are the fixers in the family. So that's always been a good thing. So I thank you all so much for this conversation. And it was a much needed conversation. So thank you guys.
And hopefully just the start of a
Yes.
long
Yes.
Ongoing
Yes.
conversation.
Yeah, and can I thank Alicia Brown from Albany, Nashonda Walker from the Bronx, Ebony Dukes Wilcox from where? Howard University. Wow. Sean Williams from Hudson Valley. TP, Howard University MSW candidate. Wow. Stacy Jackson, addiction therapist. Tamika Hinton, Access Supports for Living. This Shara Nobles from Queens. Michelle Janice Patterson. Maybe there's a relative there. I don't know exactly. Carol from Brooklyn. Kathy from Boston. Pedro from Lisbon. Wow, what a wonderful group. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you, panelists, for sharing, your wisdom so generously. And it sounds like this is a beginning of lots of further conversations and connections. It's lovely to know that you're all out there doing the important work you're doing. And I look forward to more connection in the future.
And I'd like to tell all the registrants, you will get a video recording as soon as we end the stream. It'll pop up, so you'll have that. And thank you once again for participating, and we will definitely keep you in the loop for more of our Meet and Learn series.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Good night,
you.
everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Take
Good night,
care.
everyone.